But hey everyone, John Hansbrough here with the LBL Group. Today we are meeting with Edmund Yan. We're going to be discussing virtual estate planning and what a thoughtful estate plan looks like. I've had the pleasure of knowing Edmund now for many years, and he's been able to help a few of my clients with their estate plans. So we thought, everyone's at home, people are spending a little bit more time thinking about getting their affairs and their houses in order, so to say. So I thought it made sense to get Edmund on the phone, and we could talk a little bit more about estate planning and what you can do virtually, even if you're at home, and what a thoughtful estate plan looks like and what that even is. So Edmund, how are you doing?
Hey, John, I'm doing really well. Thanks for inviting me. This is really cool.
Yeah.
My first time doing this.
Good. Yeah. Well, and, I think we're doing a lot of that now. And, I think that's partially why I wanted to get you on, as I mentioned, right? People are home. It's a little bit of a new thing for a lot of people. We're have a little bit more time on our hands. Maybe some of that time could be used to getting things done that we have been thinking about getting done, right? I know for our side of the business, we're talking a lot more about life insurance, and that conversation's been moving around with people. We've been moving through that with people because I think they've got an opportunity to sit at home, sit over the dinner table, talk with their spouses about it, and they're thinking about this stuff a little bit more. Have you been noticing that? How's the conversations been different now with people working from home and having a little bit more time on their hands?
Yeah, it's been very different. So I've been practicing for almost 10 years. Oh my God, 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing estate planning virtually, even before COVID. And what I discovered is a lot of parents, they love this experience of being able to do this at home. Because for a lot of people, they don't want to be stuck in traffic. We live in Los Angeles, and traffic is not our friend for most of the day, especially during business hours. And so requiring two spouses to drop everything and block out 2 hours, 3 hours sometimes because of traffic to sit in one estate planning meeting and having to do it again multiple times, it just doesn't work for a lot of busy professionals and even people who are retired, right? They don't want to spend all this time sitting in their lawyer's office. And so what I've discovered is that people love this experience. That's why I've been able to do what I do even before COVID and be able to service families right in the comfort of their homes. And I always said comfort of their homes, but now I'm saying safety as well.
Right.
Because they don't have to travel. They don't have to be in contact with another human being. They can get everything done. The way that I do things it's very thoughtful. And that's exactly what you talked about in the beginning of this call is how do you create that thoughtful plan? And you can do all that and more by just being home.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's something, we noticed definitely with regards to healthcare. You mentioned the safety and the comfort from being at home. There's definitely been a push towards telemedicine to in-home doctor, not as much in-home doctor visits right now during COVID, but that was a trend that we were seeing with some providers out there because people recognize the patient who you might see at your doctor's office, at the hospital, they've parked in the structure, they've gotten their ticket, they've walked through the huge facility. It's a little bit of a different visit with that 10 minutes you're going to get with your primary care doc. Then if you open up the front door to your house, a doctor walks in, there's a medical scribe with them. They spend 30 minutes sitting with you in your living room, talking through what's going on with you and doing that annual physical. The thing that we talk about a lot is called social determinants of health. And that basically says, a significant portion of someone's quality of life and their healthcare, and their quality of health is based on what's going on at home, right? So if you're a doctor and you're not seeing what's going on at home, you don't really have a full picture of someone's health. And so likewise, when you say the comfort and the safety of home, you're probably getting people in a little bit of a different mind state. They're probably able to maybe be a little bit more thoughtful. So just leading into that, what exactly does a thoughtful estate plan look like?
Yeah, so for most parents, when they think about estate planning, they think about two things, death and probate. Right? I need an estate plan because if something happens to me, I want my children, my spouse to get everything that I own smoothly without going through probate court. And so what they would do is they would hire an attorney to get it done as quickly as possible with the least thought as possible, because a lot of people, they don't want to lean into the subject of death. But what I'm going to talk about today is estate planning is so much more than about death or even about probate. Like estate planning is really about life, because your estate plan is going to provide opportunities for your children and for your spouse that they might not have had if you didn't have a plan in place. And so when I describe thoughtful planning to clients, the number one thing that I really want to drill into their minds and into their hearts is we have to be very clear about what we want our estate plan and the assets that we leave to do for our children. Because sometimes parents think my children are in their 30s, 40s, even 50s and 60s. They can figure it out themselves, right? Parents always say, they can figure it out. I'm just gonna pass it on to them. But they never talk to their children about, okay, if something happens to dad, what are you gonna do with this money that I'm leaving you, right? So a lot of children, even when they're older, they are unprepared to receive a lump sum of inheritance. And so that's one of the biggest problems we see in our industry, is that wealth doesn't go past the next generation. So whatever money you can have $10 million and your children might spend it all and nothing will go to your grandchildren. So those are some of the other issues, looking past your children. But being thoughtful is really figuring out who your family are, who your kids are, who your spouse is, and then reverse engineering a plan to make sure that you are going to support them and empower them instead of spoil them and crush them. Because, with a lot of adults, when they get $1 million, even $500,000, things start things start happening in their lives. People start coming and trying to get a piece of it. They might feel like, oh, now I have $500,000. Okay, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. And so for a lot of kids, they spend more than what they inherit. And so you actually put them into deeper debt. So when I sit down with clients, I really try to figure out, number one, who they are as a family. And number two, what are their goals? And what are their goals for their children and for their legacy, beyond their children, for their grandkids. And for some of my clients, how do you want to impact the world, right? Through charity or through other means. So when I think about thoughtful estate planning, those are some of the issues that I bring up with my clients.
Yeah, well, I heard you mentioned planning coming from the heart, and I think that's a really good thing for us to kind of dive into, right? Because something that we see from our side with helping companies and business owners plan for how they're going to leave their company, moving on to the next generation and sail off into the sunset, is that just statistically, that doesn't work really well, right? I think the statistic is something like less than 10% of businesses, family businesses, reach the third generation. And it's probably not because they're not spending enough on, legal documents and the legal planning around transitioning the business. It might be somewhat financially, but something that we just see time and time again is that companies spend so much time on the how to transfer the business that they don't think about how they actually need to transfer the how to do the business, right, to the next generation. And so likewise for the estate plan, it's not just leaving the next generation probably a house, right? It's not just leaving them maybe a college fund set up or something to supplement, your children's retirement when you've passed. There's probably a balance you have to strike there, right? With planning with the head, which is putting together the specific instruments, the specific legal documents, and planning with the heart, which is helping convey all those things, right? All those emotions. Is there something about that you've noticed has been a trend in the last few years? Because you mentioned you've been doing this now for 10 years, right? So has there been a trend to how people are trying to do those kinds of things within their estate planning documents?
Yeah, absolutely. So estate planning goes back to hundreds of years. The first living trusts were created because, men of their households would have to go abroad. And so they needed a trustee, quote unquote, to manage their assets while they're gone. And if they die during the voyage, then the trustee can take over and make sure that the family's taken care of. So back in the day, there was so much more that parents would leave their children, because
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of families back then, especially women who didn't have the opportunities that men had, they relied on their family wealth, especially the wealthy. And so what the wealthy passed along back then was opportunity, which comes from the land that they own, the businesses that they own, as well as family values. And so for a lot of them, they would have family mottos as well as family creeds. So the families knew exactly who they were as people and what they're here to do. And so for example, a notary public back then was a very respected profession. And so I think Da Vinci's uh, dad was a notary. And so Da Vinci, lucky for him, he was able to do all that he was able to do was because he was a quote unquote bastard, and he wasn't the
Yeah.
oldest. But the oldest were
Mm-hmm.
supposed to carry on the family legacy. So back then, estate planning had a completely different meaning. It was more meaningful in a sense, because there was so much connection between the prior generation and this. Nowadays, for us, even us as children, we're so separate from our parents, and so we lose
Right.
those core values and principles. But what I've been doing with my clients is we've been focusing on preserving family values and principles through the estate planning process. And so what I mean by that is, um, without understanding who you are as a family, without having values and principles, you won't be able to craft an estate plan and design one that's going to sustain and carry on the family legacy,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no cohesion with the family. And so the first thing that I always do with my clients, going back to the conversation we just had 5 minutes ago, is figuring out what core values the parents live by.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we figure that out, then we know, okay, the parents want these children to do X, Y, and Z. The children wants to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, so how do we merge those two together and form a plan that's going to support both vision, the vision of the parents as well as vision of the children? And so I'm not sure how other firms are doing it, but what I do is really having the parents understand their children. And that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes means opening up the lines of communication. A lot of parents, especially with older kids, they've never talked to them about these things. They've never talked to them about life. They never thought about, okay, what's the meaning of life to you? How do you want to live your
Mm-hmm.
best life? What does it look like? And so we start talking about these things. And so when my clients hear this and see this, they feel very empowered, because now estate planning is so much more than just passing on money, even though that's very
Right.
important. But it's about maintaining the family values and the principles, and making sure that the kids are going to understand all that and then pass it on to their children. And that's how we grow as a society and as a culture, to really benefit the next generation and show them the lessons and the mistakes that we've made, so the next generation can learn from them and grow. So when it comes to estate planning, that's the trend that I see, because that's how I'm doing it. So yeah, that's how I'm doing it these days. It's so much more than just probate and just passing on assets.
Right. Well, and you mentioned, I always kind of think progress is when we're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, right?
Yeah.
So if we're not doing that, if we're just making the same mistakes as the people ahead of us made, we're not really making progress. So, I think kind of diving into that, what would you say to a family who, maybe their children are now maybe adults or entering the adult world, right? And so now they're starting to think about mom and dad. What have mom and dad done? What should we be aware of? And how can we maybe integrate with that? Because, something that we hear about from time to time is someone's, father or grandfather or grandmother passes away. And I didn't know that grandmother had, all this UPS stock or something like that, right? They don't know that there's this family asset that's there. And there was just never a conversation about it. A lot of families don't really talk about money. They don't talk about what does money mean to them, right? Sometimes it's a taboo topic for people to get into with their family. It's rather just, you handle your money, I'll handle my money. We're not going to really talk about it. How have you seen that families are successful from a multi-generational standpoint, starting to have that conversation and getting comfortable with it?
Yeah, so successful families would talk about these things. I've got clients whose kids are the ones that call me and say, "Hey, I want to schedule an estate planning meeting with you and my parents because they don't have a plan." And so there are kids that are proactive about it, and there are parents who are receptive to the help that their kids give them. Now, what if you're in a situation where either the parents don't want to be involved or the kids don't want to be involved? Well, let's talk about in a situation where the parents just don't want to talk about it with the kids, right? We see that all the time. Parents are in their 60s and 70s. They know logically they need a plan. They know logically they've been to living trust seminars. They know the importance of avoiding probate and making sure that there's a smooth transition, but they just don't do it. And so when a lot of kids see that, they're a little bit frustrated at their parents. They're like, come on, like, how can you be so irresponsible, even though you know all of these problems and troubles that this can cause for the entire family, but you're still not doing anything because of your procrastination based on the fear of doing an estate plan, right? And so for those families in those situations, what I'd like to just express to you is, for the kids, you can't push your parents. Like, parents don't like to be told what to do unless you have that relationship with them. And so the best way for you to influence your parents is to live by example. So get your estate plan done, communicate that with them, and share with them like what's the importance of it and why you feel like it's going to help their grandkids. And so once you share those stories with them of, oh, you know, I just set up a living trust, and in this living trust, I said that if something happens to me, your grandkid, your 8-year-old granddaughter, she's going to be protected. You know, we've had life insurance. We got life insurance from John, and we have a solid financial plan. And what's going to happen is that if something happens to us, she is going to be taken care of, but she won't be able to access all the funds. We've designated our brother as the trustee of our trust, and it's going to take care of your 8-year-old daughter through X, Y, and Z. So for example, it's going to pay for her college tuition. She's going to be able to access it if she needed a down payment to a house, or if she wants to start a business. We've put funds away for her to do that. And so when you start painting that picture for your parents, then they'll start painting a picture for themselves. Then they'll start asking themselves, oh yeah, you know, what do I want my assets to do for my family? Like, my son was so excited talking about the future for my granddaughter. Like, I want that type of excitement as well. And so when it comes to talking to people, like, your energy rubs off on one another because our words carry energy, and like attracts like. So if you're inspired, if you're motivated, if you're excited about your estate plan, then your parents are going to see that, and they might start taking action. They might start Googling more. They might start watching my videos. So I've got a lot of videos that really focus on the emotional aspects of estate planning, because everyone knows estate planning logically that it's important, but until they have that emotional trigger, they're not going to do anything. And so you might want to share my videos with them to kind of get them started. And so
I think a good example of that is like you see when people are trying to get in shape, right? They know they should eat broccoli. They know that they should eat some greens. They know they should eat vegetables. They know they should, you know, maybe exercise a little bit more, cut out some of those fast foods in their diet. But how often do we hear some story about someone who they knew that those aren't new informations to them? They're not taking action because of a lack of information. It's a lack of motivation and emotional connection to that outcome. And
Exactly.
so, you see that where, my mom, she was a lifelong smoker until she became pregnant with me. Then it was, you know what? I'm no longer a smoker, right? And likewise, people start taking action on that, right? You see that young dad who he never thought about having, a concern about his weight or what it might be, but he has a little bit of a health flare up. And because of that, he decides to start getting in shape because he wants to be there for, the kid's high school graduation, the kid's college graduation, maybe his daughter's wedding, what have you. That kind of emotional connection is what actually prompts him to take that action that he's had the knowledge to do this whole time. He just didn't necessarily have that force behind him, pushing him coming from the heart, right? Coming from an emotional standpoint.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I want to pull on a thread you mentioned. So you mentioned, guardian for children, right? And so one thing that we see in America right now, there's a large demographic of single parents, right? I looked up some statistics before our call just because I wanted to get a little bit of a refresher around this. There's about 15 million, it's estimated, there's about 15 million single parent households in the U.S. today. Those 15 million households have about 22 million children in total amongst them. And so those 22 million children, that's 27% of children under the age of 21 today, right? So we're like a little bit over a quarter of all children under the age of 21 are growing up in single parent households. So for those families, right, I had that situation. My dad passed away when I was a kid. So my mom, single parent, had her plans set up that way, and she had planning around that. What should maybe some of those single parents out there who are watching this, what should they be aware of? What things should they be thinking about and questions asking themselves?
Oh, that's a really good question. And single parents are the most vulnerable, especially their children, because when you've got two parents, chances of both of them passing away at the same time is very, very slim, especially in America. But with a
Right.
single parent, the risk is much higher. And so the first concern for single parents is always who's going to be the guardian for the kids if something happens to them. Because I'm sure most parents don't want their kids to go through foster care. They don't want their kids to be split if they have multiple kids. And so
Yep.
we need to plan ahead for that by naming a guardian. Because for a lot of families, there can be a dispute when it comes to who gets to raise the children. And for a single parent, if you don't make those decisions in advance, then a judge will decide in probate court. And that's the last thing you want,
Right.
is for a judge to decide, okay, Stephen goes to grandmother and Mary goes to Uncle John or Uncle Evan or whoever it is, and they split up. Or no one wants to care for them and they go to foster care. And so having conversations with your family, having conversations with your best friends to be the guardians of your children, and then putting it in writing is very important. Not only do you need to talk to them, you need to put it in writing, either in a will or in a living trust, to make sure that the guardian that you choose will have the legal power to take over. Because if nothing's written, then someone else can petition the court to be the guardian and raise the kids. And that person might not be the person that you want to raise the kids. So that's the number one issue when it comes to single parents. But likewise, money issues is the second biggest issue for single parents. So first of all, will you have enough money to support your kids from now to the age of 18 if you pass away, right? Do you have life insurance? Do you have a financial plan to carry out your wishes for your kids and provide them with a meaningful opportunity to thrive in life so that they don't have to start at ground zero? And so making sure the money is in place to support your kids is super important. And once you have the money picture, you know that you have the financial means to support your kids beyond 18 years old, then you need to figure out, how do you want your assets to be used for your minor children when they're under 18? And how do you want your assets to be used by them when they turn 18? Because one of the biggest problems for single parents is that all they have is a will. So the will says if something happens to me, my sister's going to be my kids' guardians, and I want everything to go to my kids. The problem with that is once they hit 18, then they can request their entire share of your assets. So let's say you have life insurance, you have a house, you have cash, and let's say by the time one of them hits 18, it's worth $2 million, and you have two kids. So when that child turns 18, then that child can request the guardian to give him $1 million to go to college. And so imagine having $1 million cash in hand when you're 18 years old. Like that's why most kids just waste and squander their inheritance during a weekend in Vegas. Like it's dangerous. And so you want to make sure that you set up a living trust for minor kids. Even if you don't have a house, you still need a living trust if you have significant assets, liquid assets, because you want that living trust to manage those funds for your kids. And a living trust will give you more power, more control over how they use it. So Will would say, once they hit 18, they can take everything. But your living trust can say, no, hold on. When you're 18, you're not mature enough. You can withdraw 25% when you're 25 and another 25% when you're 30. And my trustee is authorized to give you spending money, pay for your education, but you cannot use it to, for example, buy a Lamborghini or buy 10 Chanel bags, right? Whatever the kids love these days. It's very important to maintain that control. So those are some of the things that single parents should consider, especially when they have minor children.
Yeah, got it. So you mentioned some of those documents. It might be helpful for people who, if they're not really familiar with this stuff, or they've maybe heard the terms before and they're kind of doing the, oh yeah, I know what that means, but I don't really know what that means. Can you just recap that really quick for like a will, living trust, healthcare directives, and those kinds of things? Can you just give us a quick recap of those?
Yeah, of course. So at the core of estate planning, there's only a few important documents. There's obviously the will and the living trust. So a lot of people ask me, okay, what's the difference between a will and a living trust? The number one difference is a will must be probated. Your family must take the will and go to probate court to receive their inheritance. A living trust also provides for inheritance terms for your family, but everything is done privately, away from the courts. It's not public. No one knows what's going on behind the scenes unless they're a beneficiary or they're a creditor. And so that's the major difference. And the second thing is a living trust gives you so much more control, just like what I talked about. You can pass on so many more values and principles and wealth in very creative ways, and maintain so much more control for your kids. So if you own a house, you should definitely have a living trust because it helps you avoid probate. If you have liquid assets of over $160,000, you should also consider a living trust in order to avoid probate, and for the other reasons that I mentioned. And the other documents include healthcare directive. So if you become disabled, who's going to make your medical decisions? What kind of medical treatment preferences do you have? Do you want your life to be prolonged by artificial means? Those are very important decisions that are personal to you that you need to make up and write in a legal document before it's too late. There's also the power of attorney. Who's going to manage your finances if you become disabled? Who can access your bank accounts if you're in hospital? And so you need a power of attorney to make sure that if you're in a coma on a ventilator because of COVID-19, that your family would be able to access the bank accounts to pay the rent, pay the mortgage, pay the bills, whatever else you need paid. That's very important.
Yeah.
If you don't have a power of attorney and a healthcare directive and you become disabled, your family would have to go to probate court to get a conservatorship over you and that can take months. That can be thousands of dollars of attorney's fees. And so you can avoid all of that by having those two very important documents.
So one of our, for those two documents, I want to make a note there. So one of our shows we've been watching during COVID is a lot of Grey's Anatomy. And, it's a little soap opera-y, but that is the thing that shows up every few episodes, is someone who has a certain intention for how they want their end of life to look, and they haven't communicated that.
Right.
So you've got family members, if it's a wife or a husband or a son or a daughter, and suddenly now they're realizing, hey, mom has a DNR. She doesn't want, all these life-saving, life-prolonging measures taken if she starts coding out. And that's a conversation that I think it goes back to that. Have a conversation with your family. What are their intentions? And clear that up when you're all level-headed and you're just sitting around the dinner table, not in some emotionally charged environment such as being at a hospital where, things are a little bit different. People are thinking things and there's a lot going on. And then around a power of attorney, I can mention, my grandpa was in another state. So I'm from California, born and raised in San Diego. That's where my mom is. And when my grandpa was starting to go downhill, he was starting to have dementia and he was becoming forgetful and he was visiting the hospital a lot for falls. He's in Denver. So being in another state, we deal with those issues, right? And so my grandpa was just not someone on top of these things. He never had a power of attorney set up. So suddenly my mom is needing to get a power of attorney for him from another state. And at this point now, it was after he'd started having onset of dementia. And so that made things so tricky, right? There was an attorney in Colorado who had to go interview him. That woman, she went and interviewed him and talking to her, talking to my grandpa. And he said, well, I would much rather, instead of Wendy, I'd much rather my brother Bill take over my things, right? I want him to look over my affairs. So the attorney goes to my mom and says, he'd really rather, instead of you, his brother Bill. And my mom looked at the attorney and said, well, that's why we're doing all this, because Bill died 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
He's so forgetful, he doesn't remember that.
Wow.
So would you say anything about, because we have so many more people nowadays are living elsewhere from their parents. That seems like a pretty important topic of conversation to have around those two documents, especially if you're in another state and you're not just a quick drive away. Would you say so?
Absolutely. And a lot of people, even when they're doing these two documents, they forget about a third document, which is a HIPAA authorization. So in 1996, there was a federal law passed that says that hospitals cannot release medical records of someone, even to their family, unless there's a HIPAA release. And so a lot of people think that having a healthcare directive is all they need, but they also need a HIPAA release form to make sure that their family can receive medical records from the hospital in order to make decisions for their loved ones. And so that's a really important conversation to have with your parents as well, is making sure they have a HIPAA release form. And a lot of people miss that. So make sure that your parents have a HIPAA release as well, especially if they did their estate plans prior to 1996, because there's nothing like that. And so if all they did was something 25 years ago, then they probably don't have a HIPAA release.
Got it. That'd be scary to be in that situation. You're flying blind. You don't have the information.
Yeah. And going back to your question about, having parents that live far away from you, that's a huge issue, especially if you have older parents, because you might not be there to make these medical decisions for them. And so, number one, make sure that they have a healthcare directive, a power of attorney that's specific to their state. Because if you live in California, they live in Nevada, they need to have Nevada drafted documents because the laws are slightly different. And so making sure that it's state specific is very important.
Yeah.
And making sure that someone, sorry, John, making sure that someone is there to take care of them. Maybe another family member, they can authorize another family member to also have power to make medical decisions for them if you're not able to do it yourself. So those are
would probably be a good thing then, like that conversation we mentioned. Maybe you've got two children who are living out of state. and maybe just the youngest son or daughter is living at, maybe at home or nearby.
Yes.
Probably important that everyone's on the same page, because if you're an older brother or an older sister and you're not living with your parents, you're not seeing them on a day-to-day basis, so you might not be aware of certain aspects of their cognitive decline. So, it could feel like things move really fast for you if suddenly, oh my God, my little brother is telling me that all of a sudden we need to be doing X, Y, and Z for mom and dad. Because to you, you're not seeing them on a day-to-day basis. You're not aware of where they're at, because the last time you saw them was maybe a year ago for Christmas, right? And now all of a sudden, they've had a little bit of an episode. They've had something going on. It'd be good to just be on the same page as a family with, okay, they're the closest to them. They're the most proximate. So they're going to be the quarterback of the situation. And legally, they're equipped to actually do that, right? It's not just having the family conversation, but it's also the legal equipping. So to that point, I know something you were going to share with us today is that you actually have, I believe you mentioned you have like free resources for these kinds of advanced directives, HIPAA, power of attorneys, and those kinds of things. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So if you live in California, I have a video tutorial that I've put together that shows you how to fill out a healthcare directive, a power of attorney, and a simple will. And all of this is free. The reason why I put this together is because of COVID-19. There's been so many families reaching out to me who I just cannot help in terms of their budget or for some other reason. And so this is for families, parents, people who either can't afford an attorney, who don't trust attorneys, or who just wants to do it themselves. And so you can do a healthcare directive, a power of attorney, and a simple will yourself. And I have videos that walk you through how to put those together. There's forms to download. And so if you want, you can get it on my website. John, can I give them the link?
Yeah, absolutely. If you drop that in the chat, it should be available. And we'll make sure this gets linked up to
okay, cool.
for everyone.
Yeah, then I'm not going to share it. Okay.
Yeah. So I think the last thing I wanted to touch on was, so there's, families who've never done anything. They don't have any documents in place. They may be encountering these things for the first time. Then there's also a subset of people who out there who they thought about this stuff 10 years ago when their firstborn came into the world. And they said, we've got all the parental emotions going on. We're going to get our documents get set up and everything like that. And then in the blink of an eye, 10 years passes.
Yeah.
What kinds of things should they be aware of? What value is there to reviewing those documents over time and on a periodic basis?
That's a good question. So this is for people who have not looked at their estate plan for the last 3 years. So what I've seen is that if you haven't looked at your plan, if you haven't reviewed it with your attorney for more than 3 years, then it may be either outdated or worse, it wasn't done correctly in the first place. So to give you some background, the probate industry is a $6 billion a year industry. So what that means is, yeah, and it's growing every year because more baby boomers are passing away. And so $6 billion a year is going to attorneys, going to courts, going to other people who have an interest in seeing you in probate, rather than keeping more money in the family. And so if you don't do anything else, if you don't care about values and principles or passing on this and that to your kids, care about being put in the pot of that $6 billion industry. And so when it comes to not doing it correctly, I see this all the time, is people hire an attorney or they do it themselves, or they hire an attorney that does it for $500 or $800. That means that most likely they don't help you properly fund your living trust. So what do I mean by that? If you have a living trust, you probably did it to avoid probate court. And that's completely fine. That's a really prudent thing to do. But I'm here to tell you that a living trust alone will not help you avoid probate. Right. So let me tell you again, even if you sign the living trust, you've notarized it, you say everything goes to my children, it doesn't necessarily mean that your assets are going to avoid probate. Because another thing you need to do is you need to put those assets into your living trust. And that's why we call it funding a living trust. Your living trust needs to be funded. Whatever is put inside your living trust, so imagine it as like a box, whatever you put inside the living trust avoids probate. Whatever is kept out of the living trust and is still in your individual name, then those assets are not gonna be protected from probate, especially real estate. And so if you own a house, if you took it out of your living trust last year to refinance or this year to refinance, you forgot to put it back into the trust, unfortunately, it's going to go through probate. If you set up a living trust with an attorney that did it for $500 or you did it yourself, make sure your living trust was funded. Make sure that there's a deed recorded in your county that says, I give this house, I transfer this house from my individual name into the name of my living trust. If you don't have that, your living trust is not going to help you avoid probate. So that's one of the biggest problems that I've seen with clients who just wants to get it done for as fast and as cheap as possible, right?
Yeah.
Families end up paying tens of thousands of dollars more because in California, if you own a house, the average cost of probate is between $30,000 to $40,000. And so, I charge way more than $800. And so
Right.
if you want to save a couple $1,000 now, then your family is going to pay $30,000-$40,000 more in the future. And so you end up losing a ton of money. And so I always say a living trust is not a cost, it's an investment. And so making sure you do it right in the first place is so important. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I do what I do, the service that I provide. I make sure that your living trust is properly funded, especially with your bank accounts and financial accounts as well. People leave those in their individual names, forget to change their pay on death beneficiaries, because guess what? If your pay on death beneficiary is your ex-wife or your ex-husband and you forgot to take them off, it doesn't matter what your living trust says. Your ex-wife, your ex-husband is going to get all the money in your bank account when you pass away. So
yeah, we've seen them before with old life insurance. They don't update their insurance policy, and they've got a $1 million policy paying off to their ex-wife who they've been separated from for 10 years.
Exactly. So
I don't think they look at this stuff.
So making sure it was done correctly is the first step when it comes to reviewing your plan. And the second one is making sure it's not outdated. So really quickly, making sure new assets are put inside your living trust. If you bought a house, if you open up a new bank account, investment account, after you set up your trust, make sure it's inside your living trust. HIPAA, like I said before, make sure you have a HIPAA release form. If you're fiduciaries, the people you've named as your agents for power of attorney, healthcare directive, your trustees, make sure those people are still alive and they want to continue to serve as your fiduciary, because you have to have people you trust to manage all those things if you become sick or you pass away. So that's why I provide my clients with free annual reviews every year to make sure that their plan is updated. And this is something that is near and dear to my heart because I do a lot of probate and I've seen so many families pass through probate court, suffer through it. And now it's going to take maybe 2 years because of all the COVID-19 shutdowns. So it's going to cost your family a lot of money, a lot of heartache, a lot of time if you don't do this right. So make sure it was done right in the first place and make sure it's not outdated.
Yeah. So to that point, people can check out, it's treeoflife.legal is the website. You've got those resources that we can share with everyone. I think you also have available on the website a prosperity handbook. Do you want to spend a couple minutes talking about that?
Yeah. So just like all my content, I have a handbook that's called the Prosperity Triangle. And this is a handbook that I handcrafted myself. with a lot of love and a lot of care. And the goal of this handbook is to make you start thinking about all of these things that we just talked about and more. How do you protect your wealth for your kids? How do you empower them to live fulfilling lives? These are all things that your estate plan can do. Once you get clear on your vision of what your estate plan can do for your kids, then you should design one and build one. But before then, this handbook will ask you these questions. It's a very interactive handbook. You can fill in by just typing, just download it, save it on your computer, and you can start typing in your questions. So I ask you things like, for example, for your healthcare directive, will your spouse and children know how to take care of you, right? Who's going to make your medical decisions? And also things regarding your wealth. Like, do you have a plan right now to preserve it, protect it and grow it for your family? And are your children's inheritance protected from lawsuits and financial predators? Like, how do you protect your children's creditors and predators from taking away their inheritance? And so those are really thoughtful questions you should be asking yourself. And also financial questions like setting aside funds, to give my grandchildren opportunities to pursue their goals, right? And figuring out ways to help your children use their inheritance wisely and productively. So those are some things to really think about. And this handbook is going to guide you through it. It's going to give you some prompts. It's going to give you a lot of information to help you make those decisions. And if you follow the link in my handbook, you'll also be taken to my website with a lot of videos that's going to explain all these things in details for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's great to like prompt people into asking those questions, trying to, again, get to planning from the heart. So often, we see people try to spreadsheet some of these things out, and it's not the right way. I think sometimes to go about this stuff, it's different because it's an act of love. It's not, people try to spreadsheet this stuff and make it too calculated, and it's not really where it's coming from. And I actually interested to know, so for you as a, recently new dad, how has that, do you think, affected your planning and the kind of conversations you're having with people?
Oh man, it's affected me a lot. So I'm a new dad. I've been a dad for almost 4 months, and it's everything that I've taught to other parents, it's now hit home for me. I've had my estate plan for many years, but my wife and I revisited it and we updated it because we added our core values and principles, the things that drive us, the things that we rely on to make decisions. We put those values and principles inside our living trust. So in case something happens to us, our kids can see that and would know some of the things that are important to us. So it might help them make decisions. And the really cool thing is my wife also wrote a book for us. And I would love to share it with you guys. So this is the Yan Family Book of Values, Volume 1.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to write more books for our son, for our grandchildren. And so if something happens to us, they're going to be able to know our story. So she actually wrote out a really cool story. So she named it Origins. So she shared some of the struggles that we've had, both personally, financially, and the lessons that we've learned to create the life that, we love and cherish today. Because I've been with her for almost 10 years. And so we've been able to learn a lot from life. And so we want to instill some of the values we've accumulated throughout our journey into our living trust and now into the books that we'll be writing for our family. So think of creative ways that you can do to really raise your children in a way that would make you proud and in a way that's going to give them a meaningful life. And this is our way. And this is going to really dictate how our relationship is going to transform with our son, Nathan.
Well, I think that's cool because storytelling is, that's like almost as old as humankind, right? As soon as we were able to speak, we've been telling ourselves stories, right?
Yes.
And it's why, I mean, a lot of the children's stories that we have out now today, right? Those are descended from German folklore, right? Kids in school, I remember reading the Odyssey. We're still reading the Odyssey. That's, at this point, got to be what, 2,500 years old? All these kinds of things have been around because instead of saying you should do X, Y, and Z, let's tell a story about someone's journey of personal growth and development. And that way we're expressing the development of those values, the development of those principles, and where they're coming from, and connecting them so they have some kind of emotional resonance for people. I think that's really cool. I've not really ever seen anything like that. It's like you're starting this story of the family, right? And so much of that is usually just handed down verbally, right? We're just telling stories around the table. Oh, mom still has that story about, blah, blah, blah from years past. Or I remember hearing that great grandpa did X, Y, and Z, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's a really awesome thing that you guys are doing. So I think that's kind of everything we had here. So we've got some free resources available for people to access on your site.
Mhm.
They can go download a copy of the Prosperity Triangle Handbook, and we'll link all that stuff up and we'll make that available to people after they register for the webinar. Is there anything else you want to leave us with before we go today?
Yeah, so I always express this to my clients. Continue to deliver hope to your family. I know that right now, our world, it's pretty crazy right now. There's going to be
Yeah.
a lot of changes in the next few years, economically, socially, health-wise. And so no matter how old your kids are, it's your opportunity to be the hero that they need. And to open up the lines of communication, to let them know that everything's going to be okay, and to encourage them to make this life the best that they can. Because there's so many people that's been complaining about 2020. They're like, oh, 2020 is a
Yeah.
wasted year. But I mean, it's only been 6 months, right? And you can make the best of it during the next 6 months. And my hope for you is you've made the best of it, even during the pandemic, even during the lockdown, during some of the riots that's causing a lot of property damage to people around the States. And so just continue delivering hope to everyone around you, your family. And it starts with yourself. Just continue to understand that you have so much more control over your lives than the media is trying to sell you, right? So yeah, keep delivering hope, keep loving everyone, and keep knowing that the best is yet to come.
Yeah. I love that. Deliver hope. That's really simple, but it's powerful. So, well, great, Evan. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it. We'll include Evan's information if you're interested in contacting him, as well as the resources we mentioned. Other than that, have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.